Before we start, I just want to clarify, you don't need to know anything about my book series to watch this video. I will explain everything. Obviously, with massive spoilers. And one more thing, this video took 2 whole weeks to complete, and hitting that subscribe button will take you like 2 seconds, so please, consider it. But let's just start with the actual video. FNaF. You remember those times, don't you? Staying all night watching Let's Plays from Dako or Markiplier, checking out that new The Living Tombstone song that just came out, playing some cheap fang aims, reading stupid fanfics, arguing about Mangle's gender and waiting for Wattpad to release a new FNaF game theory that will blow you and all your friends away. Remember that hype when the first teaser for Springtrap came out and the whole fandom was beyond excited for another game in the series? Or when they brightened up the final image, that piece of newspaper that showed up at the end of FNaF 3, only to reveal that Springtrap may still be alive after the massive fire. You know, I could bring examples all day, but I think that you get what I'm trying to say. FNaF is undeniably part of our childhood or adolescence, and for sure many of you experienced heavy doses of nostalgia while reminiscing back to those simpler times. 2015 and 2016, that's probably when most of you got into FNaF, around these years, when we had only 3 or 4 games and eventually some plus highs in the franchise. But for me, personally, it's around 2018, a while after FNaF 6 came out. Most of my childhood I remained a strong and loyal Minecraft fan, and that whole FNaF craze that was happening on the internet at that time, was just stupid and weird to me. Only after I got bored with placing blocks and fighting exploding green beans, I've started to branch out a little, first starting with an innocent video that popped up in my timeline. It was about FNaF animatronics, and it kinda grabbed my attention. I clicked on it, being at that time super bored, not really expecting anything. And then, after a binge of many FNaF videos that lasted for hours and then even whole days, I officially became a big fan of the franchise. And that's when this crazy and complicated story truly begins, in a chill, April evening of 2018. Let me take you on that ride powered by human agony taken straight from the rotting bodies of innocent children murdered in the VIII. Let's start. Okay, so like I've told you, my introduction to FNaF was this one little video that someday appeared out of nowhere on my YouTube timeline. It's weird to think about, but if only I had missed this and clicked on anything else, my life could be in a very different place right now. Maybe it wasn't even my choice, and I was, from the very start of my existence, meant to fall in love with these animatronics with little bodies of young children stuffed inside them. Maybe. But let's go back to the topic. This video was made by Koton, Polish YouTuber making FNaF-related content. He was very small at that time, and very recently started his Facebook group for his fans to hang out, post memes about him and all that stuff. Out of curiosity, after watching him for a few days, I've decided to try it out and join this group. To this point I've never really been on social media that much, and I've used it mainly to check out what my school friends and family members were doing. But this one group, that was just starting out, made me want to try it out and actually do something there. Like I saw, a lot of people were making fan arts of Koton. Or, rather his YouTube mascot that he's using. Their paintings and drawings got a few likes and nice comments. I kinda wanted to do the same thing, but to be honest my art skills were, and to this day still are, really terrible. My only real talent, or at least a creative thing that I was doing at that time, was writing. So, I've collected a few ideas and made my first fanfic ever. Or rather, a really small part of that fanfic, because I wrote like 200 words that first day. Excited I posted it in that group and to my surprise, people actually liked it. I wasn't in any means good, but it was okay enough to fit the FNaF fanfic standards at that time. I quickly came up with the title and who is the killer. That for some reason I wrote in English. Like, everything is in Polish, but title was in another language. I don't know, though that sounded cooler or something, I was stupid at that time. And I still really am, but that's beside the point. After that first part was published, the history was made. There was no coming back for me. The next day I had to sit at my desk and write down a continuation. It was 14th of April, and that's when the real, and who is the killer, story really begins. After the first part was written, I started working on another. And another. And another. At first, I've planned to have like 5 or 6 parts. It was meant to be a really short, miniature story, that could be completed in a week or 2. I had other projects in mind, and it was nothing more than just a quick fan art. Nothing too big or important to compete with other things that I was working on at the time. But of course, time verified my plans and flipped them on its head. I was kind of like Scott creating the first FNaF game. I left some potential for future events and plot development, but overall I wasn't expecting any success with it, and while starting, I've tried to not be too ambitious about it. So, what the first few parts were actually about. It was a story about a young boy trapped in an animatronic, somewhere in the dark depths of someone's basement. He of course wasn't alone and had a few friends, also stuffed inside these giant robots, to keep him company. I took the masked kids from FNaF 3 birthday party and made them into a team of robotic, animal mascots. Later it was revealed that the man responsible for creating them and then murdering a few children, was Katon himself. Who of you would have guessed that, hey? But anyway, he stuffed those kids with a remnant, a substantiation that was able to keep someone's soul trapped in a dead or artificial body. Here it meant that kids' spirits were forever attached to those animatronics. At that time the lore of FNaF haven't really explained how remnant exactly worked, so I had to use my imagination and to be honest, I've created the most boring shit ever. Like, in official lore we have melting metal endoskeletons that already had souls attached to them and then reusing this soul-powered metal to pose as next animatronics. How cool is that? Living metal, melting one to create another, it's great. But I've, myself, created something that looked like that glue that you use while making advanced origami. Really? Imagine being brutally murdered and then watch your torturer fill your body with a fucking melted glue. What a loser. But anyway, I'm again deviating from the topic. Katon was planning to sell those robots to a starting restaurant nearby. Of course, with kids inside them. So he packed them up and placed in a magazine where they were meant to wait for construction of the restaurant to finish. But of course it's FNaF, so next in order we had a security guard and a massive fire, woohoo. Katon hired a security guard to just take a look at those robots while they were placed in a magazine. I have no idea why he couldn't just store them in his basement, but I guess younger me had a very important explanation to this question. This security guard was later revealed to be a brother of one of the murdered children stuffed into animatronics that he was meant to keep an eye on. Wow, what a plot twist. And then the robots started walking, talking, and basically convinced him to burn them alive and free their souls or something, because for some reason Katon told them that the remnant could fail only if it was exposed to heat. So the brother did that, setting the whole magazine on fire. Yet, kids were free, he somehow survived. Katon was furious. It all came down to a nice, happy ending, right? Yeah, that's what I planned to be an ending. It was closed, I could with no problem walk away and left all those people waiting for continuation with nothing. But I kind of fallen in love with this book and overall FNaF franchise, so I got back to the drawing board and came up with a continuation of this plot. No, not in the form of another book. I just kept on writing, even though everything was kind of over. Let's see what I managed to achieve with this. So, after the fire, Katon of course lost his robots, and by consequence, clients. Brother lost his, well, brother, and also a bunch of kids burned alive too, but it wasn't that important. I've established a conflict between Katon, crazy murderer and genius creator of robots, and brother, security guard that without any hesitation listened to hunted robots and set a building on fire. But yet, of course Cotton was the crazy one of these two. A few years passed and brother was still living with guilt related to his brother passing. He despised Cotton and that rage was a thing that helped him go through his life. Everything was slowly fading away, wounds were healing and memory started to lose colors. But then he stumbled upon a new pizzeria with animatronics with them as a main attraction. Robots were new and improved, but he still noticed in them Caton's hand. He hired himself as a security guard in that pizza place, discovered that these animatronics were hunted too, and that Cotton was still storing burned down robots from this magazine fire in a fashion of FNaF 2 withered animatronics. So he of course got pissed off and set this building on fire too. And they both died in flames. And robots were burned for a second time. And it still wasn't the ending. And I still wanted to write more. Brother and Cotton had kids and those kids had kids of their own. So those grandchildren of the murdered and murderer met on a graveyard, and eventually made friends with each other. They quickly discovered, after like 15 years on living on this planet, what their fathers have done. And for some reason they felt really obligated to finish the story, or something. Like, it was finished, all characters burned to the ground years ago. But I've introduced them already, so they had to do something, even if it didn't made any sense. So they've gathered all the burned down robots from various landfills, placed them in their garden and guess what they've done to them? Guess, fucking, what? Of course, they burned them, for a third fucking time in this story that lasted for like 100 pages. Third, fucking, time. And they've prepared a nice grave to all these victims that they couldn't just leave alone, sung a nice song about it all ending, and that's it. Yeah, that's the end of the first part of And Who is the Killer series. Fortunately my young and stupid brain decided that the fourth fire may be a little too much. And that's it for this chapter. I think, looking back, it honestly isn't all that bad. Of course, it was written terribly, especially with my awful tendency to divide every scene into many small parts that were really short and never really had anything important or interesting in them alone. So you had a series of chapters that made any sense only if read one after another at one sitting. Too bad that I was releasing one part every day. My readers in the past, early days of my Wattpad career, didn't had an easy life. But other than that, and all those other, less significant writing mistakes that I've filled this text to the brim with, it was a solid FNaF fanfic with a story that was actually something more than just a girl waking up in an abandoned pizzeria and deciding to fuck all the animatronics that have suddenly become really handsome, human versions of themselves. It had some kind of developed characters which ideas, motivations, and desires kind of made sense, a few plot twists and a rip-off of the original Freddy's squad with 4 male robots and 1 female. And a psychopathic murderer that was also an excellent engineer that decided to for some reason devote his whole life to making animatronics and then stuffing little children that he killed into them. FNaF bingo filled with ease. I could just leave this series alone by this point. The book was finished, it was a completely closed story, all the plots were kind of explained and answered, readers seemed happy, and I was satisfied with myself. But suddenly, an idea popped inside my mind. And that one idea is the sole reason I'm sitting down here, writing this script and looking around my room with panic, because I just realized how much work I have left with this whole project. Yeah. 1 of the 5 done, 4 more to go. I really have a masochistic alter ego that reveals itself from time to time, only to come up with another great idea that will include me sacrificing so much time, sweat, and tears into something that no one will ever read or watch. I hate myself. But you know what I also hate? Yeah, it's time to tell the story of And Who is the Killer? 2. And Who is the Killer? 2, subtitled The Fifth Child, is a definition of a wasted potential. Reading it now, I see a lot of possibilities and many good and interesting, but, due to poor writing style, underused and badly explained concepts, ideas and plot twists. On paper, it was nice, adding some depth into the world of the original book, explaining some vague motivations of certain characters and overall providing needed backstory and context to this story that we knew very well. But it all fails in execution, buried under weird rules of this new, afterlife world, that the main character spends the majority of his time in. Yeah, I know that it's really weird and hard to understand, so let's just move on to summarizing the main plot first, before we start our deep and detailed critique of this entire thing. This time story is more linear and told through only one perspective, instead of jumping from character to character when needed, like in the original And Who is the Killer? We follow the steps of a young child named Daniel, who starts the book with something that on paper was meant to be his personal diary, where he talks directly to his imaginative audience. From the first entry we learn that Daniel is really edgy, and thinks that the whole world is unable to understand his pain and suffering. May I remind you that this kid was like 8 years old at the time, and is constantly thinking about death, murder, and all that heavy, adult stuff, instead of silly and unimportant issues like toys and having fun, that other kids always talk about. We learn that he's living only with his older brother, that for some reason really hates him, and every day leaves him alone at local Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, where he needs to talk to other children and overall do all the things your normal 8 years old kid does at pizzeria with huge animatronic robots. I got very inspired by A Crying Child from FNaF 4 and this influence clearly shows. Later, after introduction to the main character is over, I completely drop this diary-like form of narration and just continue with normal, first-person perspective. Kinda weird, but it's of course not the last time I make a certain writing decision, and then out of nowhere decide to try something different in the middle of the book. But okay, technical rambling aside, let's focus on the plot. Daniel and his 4 friends are brutally murdered by no one other than William Afton, our favorite purple guy that pops out of nowhere to kill some children. They are stuffed into the original 4 classic animatronics from FNaF 1, and Daniel receives a suit of Golden Freddy. It's not explained why exactly him, but I guess the other 4 kids were too unimportant to the plot to play this role. Then comes the marionette, which sudden appearance and backstory is of course not explained. She gives all the kids masks that allow them to possess the suits and be trapped in them forever. She is talking about it like a gift, but to be honest I'd rather be dead than eternally rot inside old Freddy's pizzeria. But that's besides the point. She then tells all those kids their quest that they have to complete in their afterlife. Our golden boy has to stop Albert, the one and only kid that wasn't killed and witnessed all the horrors by hiding somewhere, while William was on his spree, from taking revenge and avenging his murdered friends. That's his quest. But after she tells him that, she kind of recalls that he has some unclosed family stuff that he needs to deal with, so she advises him to do that first. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Why is she giving the most important order to a kid that needs to take care of himself first? There were like 4 other kids that could do that instantly. But no, the main character needs to be the chosen one, for some reason. It's weird. And that's the thing that kills this book. It has a nice and interesting premise underneath, but it's buried under all of this nonsense like that. After he receives his order, he blacks out, and when he wakes up, he discovers that a few months has passed since him being murdered and possessing Golden Freddy. Next nonsense, he is of course all covered in blood and excrements, and no one through all these few months wasn't able to notice him. He was in some sort of backroom or storage place, so at least someone working there will be able to find this animatronic that is all in child's blood. But anyway, he decides to stand up and just go straight to his home, walking through empty pizzeria and passing so many people in the streets. It's later revealed that he's some kind of ghost, and only dead individuals can see him, but still, he doesn't know that. It's a really risky move to just walk around without a care in the world, when you're a big, scary, animatronic bear that has your old, human body still inside you. But never mind. Daniel comes back to his small flat, and discovers 3 human bodies. 2 murdered and 1 hung. It's never explained who these 2 guys were, but that hung one was his older brother, that decided to commit suicide. He was really depressed and couldn't bear the loss of another member of his family. Daniel, after seeing this, becomes, understandably, really sad and furious, blaming the world, his murderer, and even himself for it. Then, out of nowhere, he starts to hear voices telling him to don't worry about it, and all that shit. It's really cheap, and you, as a reader, can clearly see that I, as a writer, have run out of ideas and decided to just tell the main character something out of the blue to push the plot forward, not by a logical sequence of events, but rather by leading him by the hand through all various symbolic scenes that I had in my mind. From this point the plot becomes really just a series of loosely connected short stories and flashes of exposition, and it's really hard to even summarize. But basically, and in the shortest, it all comes down to Daniel wandering around this afterlife world, or rather dimension, talking to people he knew, and getting sad about the things that they've told him. It's revealed that his mother died giving birth to him, and that's part of the reason to why his brother hates him so much. He also accidentally killed his father using his pistol and, because he was still like 8, couldn't call for help. It's all really sad and kind of touching, honestly, but it's of course, like always, buried behind awkward dialogues and descriptions that are devoid of detail. Then he learns that he has failed his mission, and that Albert somehow grew up and was able to live many years of his life, while in Daniel's world only a few months have passed. I don't know, at this point I'm not even trying to understand. What you need to get from this, is that Albert aka Cotton became a murderer out of revenge, and because his killed friends told him to do that. For some reason. Then after Daniel hears that his only afterlife goal wasn't accomplished, his family gathers up and the book ends. Like, just ends, they hug each other, and then I start to write credits. Don't worry, I myself after reading it all yesterday have a very similar level of understanding this book as you have now. Was it needed? No, of course not. It added some context and backstory to Caden's story, but other than that it could be completely separated from the "and who is the killer" series and no one would ever notice. Was it a good book? No, of course not. It had a few tolerable moments, but other than that it was a piece of garbage from top to bottom. While in original, my awful writing style was compensated by well-crafted characters and overall interesting plot that made sense, here the style is the least important issue. And that's not a good sign. The writing process of this was very quick and lasted for like a week. But it was an important lesson to me. To not rush projects, to really think about the whole plot from the start, and to have a system of notes to help with some complicated parts of the lore when needed. So I really took that lesson to heart and stretched the writing process of the next book in the series titled The Sun's Mistakes for a few, long months. Let's just dive into this madness, shall we? The Sun's Mistakes is huge. Really, really huge. And I won't even attempt to try and summarize it all here, in this already very long video. Maybe in the future, but I highly doubt it. It's so long, and it took so much time to complete, because it's just basically the entire plot of FNaF squeezed into one book. And with many side characters, motivations, and new plots added to the bunch, if original wasn't long and complicated enough. I don't know what I thought opening the Word document for the first time. I was stupid. And I was, of course, regretting this decision later. Oh boy, how much I was regretting this decision later. But I kept my promise and through intense pain, suffering and losses of hope, delivered what I've told I'd deliver. Never, ever fucking again. So, as you may already know, FNaF story is kinda hard to understand. It's not because it's so complicated and convoluted, but rather because the pieces needed to get the full picture are well hidden and most of the time kept secret. And also very, very small. It's like trying to complete a simple Lego building, but the building blocks were divided into thousands of small parts of these blocks that you first have to put together. This house may be consisting only of 20 main blocks, and it may seem very simple, but in reality each block takes hours and hours to complete. I'm slowly running out of metaphors, so let's just move on from this, okay? The plot of FNaF is hard. You can watch dozens of theories, read many Reddit posts or, if you're brave enough, try and play these games by yourself. but it probably won't help too much. You will get and understand certain parts of the lore, but connecting them all together into a single story that actually makes sense is something that you'll likely fail miserably at. It's mainly because huge parts of our understanding of the plot are nothing more than just theories. They may change, they may be wrong, they are sometimes kinda just barely fitting to the rest of the facts that we know. And often we have to make compromises between them. For example, back in the days, there was this huge debate about Ultimate Custom Night and, more precisely, if it's a hell for Michelle or William. And both sides had solid arguments, they both could be considered right. But the correct answer was only one. So you just kinda had to stick to one of them and deal with the consequences of that choice. Because if you choose Michael, some of the main theories that we based the whole plot on, were now false and incorrect. And the same thing was with Will. Again, some main theories just weren't fitting in with the new facts added to the plot. And that's probably the hardest part of trying to piece the FNaF story all together. There is no such thing as a perfect theory. All speculations have their stronger and weaker parts. And something always, even if it's just a tiny detail, won't exactly fit in and cause problems. Like having a Lego set with some parts that are missing. You can use them in any combination you think is the best and correct, but it will always be missing something. And I had this struggle as well, of course I had, especially 3 years ago when fandom was in heated discussions of certain topics that I had to simplify and just make a decision on the spot. And it probably wasn't the best idea, to be completely honest. I started writing this with a goal of making a FNaF story not only all pieced together, but also filled with something that it was, in my opinion, lacking. And that was the motivations of certain characters. Of course, we knew that hatred and lust for revenge that Henry had towards William, but other than that, what we actually had to work with. William was a mystery from the start. Why did he start murdering children and putting them into suits? Was he just crazy, or maybe it was justified by something? I've struggled with it, and in the end came up with something that kinda made sense at first, but in the long run completely destroyed the chronological order of the events and made everything even more messy and weird. All plot is started and then based on one important event. Death of crying child from FNaF 4 in the jaws of Fredbear, caused by William's son, Michael. Both the crying child and Michael were William's kids, so when the first one was killed by a robot that his partner and friend, Henry, created, he got understandably furious. And Michael's lie that it wasn't his fault, definitely didn't help to calm Afton down. Henry opened a new restaurant, William killed some children, it got repeated, then Afton for some reason opened Circus Baby Pizza World, Michael started working there to keep an eye on his father, he got scooped and stuffed with the remnant, somewhere in that time William for some reason got stuck in Golden Bonnie suit, 30 years passed, Fazbear Frights opened, William burned for the first time, fake restaurant that Henry opened to end this whole thing lured all the animatronics in, and then buried all of them including Henry and Mike alive. And that's it. It's a plot fueled and powered by an urge for revenge. First, it was William killing for his dead kid, but then it was Henry creating this trap for his dead kid. And in this mix was Michael, full of regret and aware that this whole thing happened because of him. So he devoted his whole life to helping Henry fight with his evil father, with that monster that he unintentionally created. On the surface it may seem really complicated, but at its core it's a simple story about lust for revenge going too far, and causing only more and more problems. Of course, it had lots of side threads that I've added, for example the plot of two lovers that were killed and separated from each other by William, but with a bit of help from a little boy were reunited, sharing their deep feelings for each other even though they're now possessing old, animatronic suits. I've tried really hard to portray everyone like a human, no matter if we're talking about unnamed, murdered kids, or even a killer. Everyone had their own reasons, motivations, backstories, relations with each other, and I think that adding those types of details to a story really helps to make it all seem real and alive. Because it's a one thing to just mix together a bunch of loose concepts and ideas, and another to make them connect and match with each other in a meaningful way. Yet, I think that The Sun's Mistakes captured it pretty well. Despite its many problems, it still is a story that makes sense and has some impactful moments. But while we're on the topic of mistakes, let me tell you about some of them. The biggest issue I had while writing this book was FNAF's timeline and trying to piece all the events in a chronological order. Trust me when I say that I could spend all night just thinking intensively about how to fit FNAF's lore into my book's story, and still have a lot of things to consider the next morning after waking up. I don't know why I've decided to, at one hand, stay really close to FNAF's plot and don't skip or change anything, but at the other, still add some characters and plot lines that in a long run made me change so many things. At first I swore that I'll stick to the original story, and then, 5 minutes later, I'll add something new to it. It was weird and kind of tiring, to be honest. Writing is fun, but when you're so limited, and you must consider your every storytelling step twice before you make it, it's stripped of almost all the joy and satisfaction you'll normally get from it. And I've struggled with it too. I had so many breaks, and I've written so many other projects alongside The Sun's Mistakes, that without them, it would take like half of the time I've spent on it. But breaks weren't the worst part. The worst thing that have happened while I was working on this book was messing up the chronology, and then needing to make changes in almost half of the book. Really. One day I've decided to add some not so important plotline that I was, for some reason, super passionate and hyped about. I've written it, it was cool, my readers seemed to enjoy it. I've done a great work, haven't I? No, of course not. Really soon after I've realized how fucked I am. This small plotline made me change something in the chronology of the locations and animatronics. I don't remember exactly what happened, but the outcome was basically me needing to change the order of like 40 chapters, and then also changing all the names of locations, dates, and all that shit. It was really time consuming, and in the process I've made probably more mess than before the so-called repair has started. And that kind of thing was happening very often, of course on the smaller scale, but still. I've forgotten somebody's name and then needed to correct it in the next 20 chapters. Half of the trouble if it was just a name, the problem was more serious when due to a stupid mistake, I've written about another character than planned. And yet, something like this has actually happened. Writing process was very time consuming, hard, tedious and exhausting, honestly. But I've learned a lot. Like, a lot. And to be honest, half of my practical writing knowledge today comes from The Sun's Mistakes. I'm kind of proud of this one. It maybe isn't good, but it's close to being one. It was written with passion, and it shows. You can feel the heart put by me into this thing. Although very flawed and not so close to the original FNAF's lore, it is, in my opinion, the single best and Who is the Killer entry. Although it mentions Cotone from previous books like once or twice. This series is happening all in the same universe and timeline, just Afton and Cotone don't cross the lines with each other very much, outside this backstory thing explained in The Fifth Child. It kinda makes sense to be in this series, like, exploring the backstory of the killer that made first and Who is the Killer. Even a thing in the first place, but also, it's just a regular FNAF fanfic with already existing series slapped to its name. I leave it up to you to decide if that's a good thing or not, because I honestly don't really care. And Who is the Killer? 4. The suicide ending literally has a major spoiler in its name. Before you even start reading, you already know how it ends. But you know, that's okay. Because the whole and only purpose of this book was to end the entire series with a spectacular splash of fresh, red blood. And we all knew that. While writing this, and of course, my dear readers, while sinking their hungry teeth into the meat of this entry. It was obvious. And Who is the Killer? Needed an appropriate ending. And what is better than good, old suicide committed by every character left alive, after a good, old murdering spree? Nothing, of course, nothing. So, let me tell you about how it starts, because you for sure know how it all ends. The book opens with the main character, David, not to be mistaken with Daniel. They're both completely different guys from completely different books and times, who is a young, depressed man slowly driving through the middle of nowhere, to meet Mariana. Mariana is an elderly woman who has got to know David via online forums and chats. And I know that it sounds kinda weird, but it will soon make a lot of sense, trust me. So, David is a grandson of Cotton. Yes, this Cotton that murdered children back in and who is the killer. 1. And Mariana is a mother of one of the kids murdered by William Afton, around that times when Cotton aka Albert was still a kid that planned to be a murderer in the future. You get it? David is a grandson of the guy that murdered kids, because he saw William killing his friends. And William was the guy that murdered Mariana's daughter. I know that it's probably really confusing, so I'll just show you a graph or something like this. But anyway, the story is set a few years after that infamous, final fire, that killed both William, Henry, and Mike. And also long after Caden's victims were burned for the third time, and finally buried in the ground. Everything ended, the only thing left was to keep the memory of the victims alive in the hearts of their families, and try to gather as much evidence as they possibly could. And that was how David and Mariana met. They were both trying to find as many answers regarding these murders as they possibly could. Mariana had lots of information about Afton, and David had lots of information about Cotton. They both got to know each other very well, becoming friends and finally deciding to meet up and show each other all the documents, killer's diaries, and all that stuff in person. David was driving to meet her, because she didn't had a car and lived really far away. And that's the whole premise of this book. Two people that were actively trying to know as much as they could about these murders, deciding to have a meeting. But of course, something had to go horribly wrong. It's FNaF, it's and who is the killer. And it, of course, had. David and Mariana were both very depressed and, you guessed it, suicidal. He was, because his girlfriend left, then he had lost his stable job and in consequence couldn't afford living in his old house, so had to move. And basically, the only thing keeping him alive was that desire to learn about the whole story of Caden's and William's murders. And Mariana was, because she, after losing her daughter long ago, became very lonely and kind of just lost all purpose in life. She had, like him, became obsessed with learning more and more about these cases and couldn't move on. And as she was becoming older and older, she stopped caring about her health, just waiting for something in her weaker and weaker body to finally put the end to all her suffering. That meeting with each other, that final exchange of information that they both had, was meant to be a last meaningful thing that they have done in their lives. After that, David planned to commit suicide, and Mariana just to wait, knowing that her final days were with each day drawing closer and closer. But, like I've told you before, something had gone very, very wrong. They have met, they have talked, they have exchanged all the documents and physical things that they had. Everything went well, but the next day they have found something weird laying on the saloon's floor, after returning to Mariana's house after a quick visit in the local graveyard. Someone left a small figurine of Freddy Fazbear. But it wasn't just an innocent figurine meant for a prank or a joke. It was filled with blood, that slowly started spilling on the floor, creating a puddle that was becoming increasingly bigger and bigger. They were furious. And, understandably so, scared. So they've knocked on the door of the only person that they could think of, that could possibly do something like that, and actually had keys to her house. It was Evan. A new character. A longtime friend of hers, that was helping her with all the house chores, shopping, and all that other stuff, that an elderly woman may need help with. David was skeptical and thought that he may not be as good as Mariana told him he was. And he was correct. More than he could ever imagine, or want to be. The first victim of Evan's killing spree was Mariana. Her body was found by David, laying motionless in a big puddle of partially dry, dark blood. She had lots of injuries, but the most notable thing was a big helmet shaped a bit like an animatronic's head. Inside, it had lots of spikes and sharp blades, that were able to instantly kill someone after putting in on his head. But another important feature that it had, was a mechanism that prevented it from being pulled off. So, if you unfortunately got that thing on your head, there was no way it was taken off. You just had to tear out the entire head inside it too. It was brutal and unnecessary gory, because I, being at that time heavily inspired by lots of bloody criminals and thrillers I've read, wanted to write something as disgusting and gory as I possibly could. And I've achieved my goal, making this book really boring and repetitive really fast. Yet, when it comes to me writing, I always find a way to mess up a promising idea or a concept because of my laziness or weird fixation on something. But anyway, let's get back to the plot. After Mariana's body was found, the whole story becomes just your standard criminal, with cops trying to understand the killer's motives and find the truth before it is too late, and said killer just doing his weird crazy plans, trying to not get caught. It's quickly revealed that Evan has a list of 4 targets, that he wants to eliminate, one of them being Mariana and the other, you've guessed it, David, the main character. David gets kidnapped and, after a long session of unnecessary tortures, finally killed by the Freddy's mask, the same as that one used on Mariana. It just becomes Evan's signature move. With 2 targets left on his list, that police conveniently found looking through his diary, it's just a game of cat and mouse between them and the killer. It's not very interesting and becomes kinda boring very fast, so I'll just summarize this as quickly as I can. So, those 2 targets were revealed to be 2 elderly males, staying in 2 hospitals far away from each other. They were both too old to even move, and were staying alive only by medical devices keeping their body functions running. He couldn't ask for easier targets to assassinate. The only difficulty was in escaping the hospital crew, but he easily got away with that. After committing the next 2 brutal murders without any problem, he headed straight home, where one police officer was awaiting him. 1. Because the rest of them was sent to unsuccessfully chase him around. It doesn't really make sense, they could have left at least one more policeman here in case something getting wrong. And he was a serial killer after all, so they could predict that something will probably, indeed, go very wrong. But anyway, he got back home, gave this one officer his weird and crazy speech about his cultist-like love for William Afton, and then killed himself in a spectacular fashion. That is, by getting his head crushed by animatronics' hands. I took much inspiration from, spoiler for the FNaF novel trilogy, Silver Eyes and the way Henry took his life by creating a stabbing robot to do that. Here Ethan took a similar approach, but instead of stabbing he chose crushing. Well, different enough to not be called a straight copy. And that's it, the whole story ends with him killing himself. In this summary I've kinda skipped the whole subplot of him being almost a cultist follower of William, because it was, to be honest, weird and boring. The only thing that you need to take from that is his motivations. And that is him killing all the remaining people that had to do something with Afton or Cotton. And by that something, he meant mainly family of the killed children, or direct relatives of the murderers. He wanted to end what William have started, and finally put the end to this convoluted tale. And he did exactly that. After the main story was finished, I've written a short, 2-part epilogue for the whole series. It was just all the characters coming together in the afterlife, hugging each other, crying of joy and all that other stuff that you would expect people in that situation to do. Of course all 3 murderers were sent straight to hell, all victims to heaven, and Mike landed in a purgatory. And that's it. This ending was honestly very touching and beautiful, and it fits very well with the rest of the books. This video should end exactly here, with subtle piano in the background and this screenshot from FFPS of all the graves. But we have one more thing to cover. One more book, one more entry. I'm starting to lose my sanity, so let's just move on and get it over with. This video will be so fucking long, my god. Sorry. And who is the killer? Stories, You Are Part of Me is, like this super long title suggests, more like a long story, rather than a short book. Although, it's still much longer than The Fifth Child, but you know, everything is longer than The Fifth Child. It doesn't matter. Okay, but let's for 1 second stop bullying this poor second entry of the series, and focus on the fifth. You see what I did here? The fifth but not child but entry and. Okay, I'm so tired of writing this, I keep saying nonsense like this, sorry. The sooner I shut up and start talking about the actual book, the sooner I'm free to doing all the other things I'd like instead of banging my head against the keyboard. Yeah. Let's get over with it. So, this book was meant to be the first entry in a new sub-series called And Who is the Killer? Stories. It was meant to be something like Fazbear Frights, but with a bit longer and complicated stories, based on the ideas used in my fanfic. Yes, it was theoretically a fanfic of a fanfic. Yes, I was this stupid, and yes, I really had nothing better to do than this. But you know, fortunately after writing You Are Part of Me I've realized how much work will it take to make it into an actual series, so I gave up and called it a day. Don't get me wrong, the book itself was fine, and honestly I would easily put it somewhere in the top of And Who is the Killer? Tier list. Just the idea of making a whole sub-series instead of creating something completely new, was really stupid. Now, that you can finally understand the weird naming and this book's position in the series landscape, let's get to summarizing the plot. And before we start, I need to mention that this entire section has a big trigger warning for things like self-harm, suicide, alcohol abuse, etc., so if you're sensitive to these topics just go to the timestamp displayed on screen, okay? Great. Let's begin. So, this story was focused mainly on two different plots. One of them was your standard, thriller-like seeking the truth of some kind and then realizing how awful it is, and the second one was based on exploring the developing romantic relation between two of the main characters, as the story was moving forward. The main premise was that the girl, Patricia, was abused by her alcoholic father, who for some reason, seemed to really despise her. And the boy, Robert, was trying to help her, at least providing distraction and taking her mind off the traumatic events for the times that they were together. So that's the basic foundation for this romantic relation that I've mentioned before. We had two characters of similar age, slowly starting to spend more and more time together, and being used to one another. Then, the difficulties that they had to go through to sustain their relation, will only strengthen it and deepen their mutual trust. It wasn't just a mindless making out with each other every scene that they've met, like in many other fanfics. I was trying hard to make this relationship realistic and believable. And it turned out, honestly, not that bad at all. As for limitations, such as the other plots that I've put more emphasis on, or the short length of the whole story that made me kinda rush some things, it was okay. And for the other plot, that more thriller-like thing, I've prepared something that would make this into an actual FNaF fanfic. Please try to focus a little more on this segment, because otherwise it may be very confusing. So, a few years ago, Patricia's family got in a serious car incident. She and her father had survived and got only slightly injured, but her mom was in a critical state. She needed to be on life support, and doctors saw no chances of potential improvement. The desperate father sold all of his possessions to buy all the needed equipment to bring her home and still keep her alive at all cost. She was technically dead, but he refused to let her go. So he tried and tried, trying doctor after doctor. No one was able to help. So he, in a last act of desperation, bought an animatronic bear and then transplanted her consciousness into it. That's right, he transplanted his wife consciousness into an animatronic bear. But he was too scared to try and test it out. So he just kept that animatronic in his basement, drinking to forget about the life of his wife that was now kept solely on his hands. The daughter had no idea of what was happening, and just though that her mother was dead for years. She was able to move on, but not he. And that's the moment when the story starts. Robert and Patricia meet after he moves with his family to her town. At first they're a little awkward with each other, but they quickly start to get closer and closer. Eventually he learns the truth about her father, and all the problems that she has, including tendencies to self-harm, and tries to help, to at least distract her from all this mess. A few months pass, and they start to branch out a little more and eventually develop a small group of close friends. They celebrate her 16th birthday in a house of one of them, a good 15 minutes away from Patricia's house. She has to leave early and decides to go alone. While she's walking through a dark, snowy forest, something attacks her. A giant bear. She goes missing, and after 2 days of her not giving a single sign of life, Robert and her father decide to start looking for her. He knows that his animatronic wife escaped his basement, and he thinks he knows where she could take his daughter with. They arrive at the road of that fatal accident. And there she is, standing tall and holding Patricia in her robotic hands. Robert grabs a gun and the father starts talking to his wife. She seems to respond, but Robert can't resist the pressure anymore, and fires a bullet. The robot goes crazy, so he fires another one. And another one. Soon she's down, and Patricia is free. Father is understandably mad at both of them. He throws Patricia out of the house, so she needs to move out to Robert's place. The man goes silent for a couple of days, but suddenly he sends her a message. He calls her to his house. She goes there and finds out that he killed himself, finally realizing all the mistakes he has done. He reveals everything about the robot and death of her mother. She just falls on the floor, bursting with tears. But she isn't alone. Robert is there, as always, helping and providing some comfort when needed the most. As always. The book ends with her, the next few months later, confessing love to him and thanking him for all he has done to her. And that's it. That's the ending of this story, but also of the whole And Who is the Killer series. One final suicide, and one final confession of love. How poetic. I think that this story had a lot of potential, that was a bit wasted by the style and inexperience with creating relations between characters. But it wasn't all bad. It had its moments and, honestly, the ending was really touching. The concept was great, it just couldn't shine as bright because of the execution, that was a bit off. Yet, it's definitely one of the better entries of this series, and something that will surely occupy my mind for some time. Fun fact, script to this video is a bit longer than And Who is the Killer stories, You Are Part of Me, and more than 2 times longer than And Who is the Killer 2, The Fifth Child. Let that sink in. A bit longer and 2 times longer. And I've written this piece of garbage in around a week, excluding proofreading and all those other tortures I had to go through. I don't know if I should hate myself for being so slow back then, or for putting so much work on my shoulders now. Either way, I'm just tired. I want to see the light of day again, and not just stare at the computer screen, typing some stupid words for some stupid video that no one will ever watch, including myself. Okay, I'm going to show you some cool numbers and graphs, and that's going to be it. I assume you can read and draw conclusions all by yourself, so I won't bore you with my commentary. Enjoy. And I also made this cool timeline, showing my horrible writing habits and inability to have on my mind less than 2 projects at the time. And yet, the son's mistakes really took the majority of time spent on creating this series. I should be ashamed of myself. And you know what? I really am. Finally. Finally. To be completely honest, I don't really know what to say here. You know my opinion on all the individual entries, so I would be repeating myself here if I'd try to summarize my opinion on this entire series. I just want you to know one thing. I really love And Who is the Killer. In many ways, it seriously changed my life. From adding to my writing experience, to even making a few relations with people that were very important to me. It makes me very nostalgic while I'm thinking about it. I have so many memories. After all, almost an entire year of my adolescence was dedicated almost solely to FNaF and this series. That feelings I have towards this series are just too complicated to even try translating them to words. Only thing I can admit is that I fucking love and who is the killer. And that's it, that's the summary to this video. I love this series, even if it sometimes makes me really mad and furious. Yet. Thanks for staying to the end. It was a, wild ride, to say at least. I hope you're having a great day and, once again, thanks.